Hi, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. It's hosted by KaiNexus. I'm Mark Rabin, a senior advisor with KaiNexus. I'm really excited that we are joined today by someone that we've known for a number of years now. She is Stephanie Hill. She's the owner of Lightbulb Moment Consulting. And the topic today, I think, has applicability to a wide range of industries, transitioning lean from manufacturing to the office. So welcome, and thank you to everybody who has joined us today. So with that, let me tell you a little bit about our presenter, Stephanie Hill. She is, again, the owner of Lightbulb Moment Consulting, based in Des Moines, Iowa. Stumbled over that, sorry. She's in Des Moines. She has over 20 years of experience applying quality and continuous improvement in the manufacturing, retail, insurance, and healthcare industries. So she's really well equipped to share about today's topic with us. She has certifications in strategic HR leadership and scaled Agile. She has a master black belt in Lean Six Sigma, a master's degree in public health, and a bachelor's degree in chemistry. Stephanie's focus is on helping small businesses and nonprofits improve their effectiveness and efficiency through the combination of people, processes, and performance. And again, one last mention of it for now, go to menti.com and enter the code 6159357. So with that, Stephanie, thanks again, and I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Mark. So just to give a little bit of a background about why I wanted to have this talk about this, I have spent 20 years in continuous improvement. And of that, 50% of that has been through manufacturing, and the other 50% has been through more of an office environment or a transactional environment. And I'm going to use those terms pretty interchangeably, office and transaction. And I started in manufacturing. When I tried to make the transition, I really thought that I could do a drag and drop approach. So take all of the Lean Six Sigma tools that I learned in manufacturing and applications, and I could just pick that up and drop it into the office setting and have people run with it, just like they did in manufacturing. And as you might imagine, I had quite a few fumbles along the way that didn't really work like I had thought it would. So I tried to figure out, where should I really be focusing and where are these differences really taking place? I ended up boiling it down to three key differences. And so I thought it would be helpful to share that with all of you, the differences that I discovered, and then the approaches that I took in order to adapt to make sure that I could be successful in those environments. Okay, so for the outline today, we're going to talk about the objectives. We'll spend a little time learning about you, so your location and your role. I'll go through those three key differences that I just mentioned, and then I'll return to those and talk about the adjusted approaches. We'll then finish with some takeaways and Q&A. All right, so for the objectives, you're going to be able to identify three key differences to overcome when making the transition from lean or continuous improvement in manufacturing as you move to the office. You'll also be receiving tools and techniques that you can apply in order to overcome the key differences and increase your confidence to apply lean to new environments and applications. Okay, but first, we're going to start with you. So in your Menti, so hopefully all of you have been able to get that open, I'm going to ask that you put in what state or country you live in. Oh, everybody's already jumping on this. Oh, how exciting.
That's great. And again, I've put the link and the code in the chat for anybody who needs to get that.
Maybe I should have entered something. I need to get Iowa on that screen. Somebody is from Hello, which I love.
Hello is a very friendly place, I've found.
Oh, yeah, definitely. And I like Tomorrow as well. That's a cool one. Oh, hey, Iowa's on the screen. Wonderful. All right, so I don't know if that'll continue. I think it probably will until we go to the next slide. But it looks like a number of you are in much better weather than, well, except Canada's up there too, right? But we got California and Texas as some high ones. So probably much better weather than we're having in Iowa. Although I should not complain because it's been a much milder winter than we've had in the past. All right, I'm going to jump back to the presentation. So the next thing I'm going to have you do in Menti is to indicate what area you work. There's, I think, 8 different options here. You can choose more than one when you do this. And so if you feel like, you identify as working in 2 different locations, maybe you can put that in, and that's completely fine. So let's advance this one. I really like how this works in Menti. This is really neat.
It's really interesting to see.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I got to remember to set a timer. Just so you know, I'm trying to give you 30 seconds for each of these. So,
and for those listening to the podcast recording, manufacturing, healthcare, service are the top 3 that have come up so far.
What's interesting is that other is quite high as well. So I'm wondering what we probably missed there. Well, and I think you're probably pretty well networked with the healthcare world. So that would draw quite a bit. All right. So manufacturing, healthcare, and service looks like the highest ones for now. Okay, so I'm going to jump back over. All right. Yeah, I wish I could talk to each one of you. We don't have that option to be that interactive, just to find out, have you always been in that field? Are you making a transition to another field? So that would be good to know too, but alas, we're going to go forward this way. All right. So key differences between lean in manufacturing and the office. So here we go. Oopsie. Before I get started, I want to do a disclaimer, which I like to have at the beginning. So I always think about the fact that we want to be sure to get the voice of the customer before we get started with any improvement. So in this presentation, I'm going to be generalizing, talking about manufacturing and office environments, but I also know that each setting, culture, and individual is unique. So regardless of what you hear today, I also encourage you to take the time to learn about the people that you're going to be working with and the culture. So that's my disclaimer. All right, so here's the big reveal. The 3 key differences that I have found are association to work, frequency of work units, and significance of waste. All right, so the first one is the association to work, and this is a big one. It's essentially how closely people feel tied to the work they do on a daily basis. If you think about manufacturing, I think about hands. Like I think about work units moving across people's hands. It's very tangible. You can usually, touch and feel what you're moving, and so there's a distinct difference between the person and the item. Change is frequent. Experimenting is very, very common. So, people might change shifts. They might change the work that they're producing. So they might do a lot of different changes in there. So it becomes easier to separate the person, their identity, from the work that they're doing. So again, there are exceptions. I know if people are more maybe skilled laborers, or if they're leadership within manufacturing, sometimes there is a stronger association to work. But in general, that's kind of how we're going to look at it here. When we're in the office setting, the work might not be very tangible. So there's a lot of, creative thinking that might be going on. There could be a lot of relationship building. And so a lot of that is not super tangible. And especially when we're moving more from a paper environment to an electronic environment, it's almost like there's a stronger association to the work. The person could have spent years studying or practicing the field in which they're working. And so change is probably infrequent for them, or change feels like their personal responsibility or their leader's responsibility to have them make a change. So their association is strong, and their reaction to change could be a lot different from someone in a manufacturing setting. Okay, so just to kind of give a real example, let's imagine that you have just made a mistake while you were completing a mortgage form. Okay, so that's your job. You're completing a mortgage form. It has cost a potential buyer their dream home. Your manager comes to you and says, "Why did this happen?" Okay, so you got that scenario. Your manager's come to you, wants to know why this happened. When you are in that seat, what can you just put into Menti? I'm going to put that back over here. Some words or a word that describes how you would feel in that setting. Lousy, stressed, guilty, shame, disappointment, frustrated. Oh, terrible. All the blames. System fail. Okay, just a couple more seconds here. Regretful. Yeah. Okay, so a lot of not super pleasant words, I would say, to sum that up. All right, so let's switch gears a little bit. Then we have a situation where a customer called into customer experience and informed the representative that they cut themselves on a defective product. So the representative replaces the product and paid $2,000 in medical bills. So they're trying to take care of them. In the meantime, the shift supervisor gathered the crew that assembled the product that day and asked, "Why did this happen?" What would the approach be that the team would take? All right, so when you think about that, my questions were a little bit different, right? So in the first case, I was asking about why, or like what the feelings would be that you would have. And in the second case, I asked about the approach that you would take. And the reason I did that I mean, there was a reason, right? So when we're in the office setting, we naturally look at the individual. We are very used to the concept of individual accountability. And individual accountability is a good thing when it comes to decision making. That's a much more, I would say, efficient decision making option there. But it can be difficult to get an objective response from someone when we ask the question why. Why feels very personal when there's more of an individual accountability there. Now, in manufacturing, I asked about the approach because in that setting, we view a defect happening typically as collective ownership, right? So there's crews, like I said, that they got the crew together, not a single person. And we would naturally question the process, the tools, and not necessarily the people, right? We've kind of learned over time that there are other elements involved in a defect happening versus the person, the individual. Okay, so the second difference that we find when we go from lean in manufacturing to lean in the office is frequency of work units. So when we look at manufacturing, we typically see a unit of work moving through a process in a short period of time. So there's a fast cycle time. In the office, on the other hand, it can take weeks to a month often for a process to fully be completed. So it has a longer cycle time. There's exceptions. So in manufacturing, I've been to a place where they build airplanes and their cycle time is very long. And then the flip side, in the office, if you have like a customer experience center, they're taking calls, every minute. And so they're looking at things in a matter of seconds or minutes. But overall, we're going to just kind of generalize and say office has a longer cycle time than manufacturing on average. Okay, so that has some impacts when we're looking there. Three main areas that I've noticed. So it impacts our data collection, how we go to the Gemba, and the momentum of our progress. So for data collection, when we're working with longer cycle times, or if the work's happening like infrequently or unpredictably, it makes it tough to get that data. And as we know, we need the data for prioritizing our efforts. So, when we can take that data and quantify it and then put dollars to it, that helps us to get buy-in and to get, our work moved to the top of the list if it's very important. It gives us some insight so we can do some statistical analysis to find out more about the problem that we're facing. And it also demonstrates whether we've seen an improvement. So if we can get that baseline data and then we collect data at the end of our improvement, we can see if we truly made a difference. And then it helps us to know going forward if our improvement efforts are worthwhile, if we need to change them, how we need to structure them. So the data is really important. And I know I'm preaching to the choir. I think everybody here is probably on the data boat with me. So we're going to move to going to the Gemba. And going to the Gemba, it just as a recap, it means that you're going to the place of work to see how value is created. And so when work is created like at a slower cadence or if it's less predictable, it can be difficult to watch the process, especially as a whole team going to watch a process. And the third one is the momentum of progress. So if a project in the office takes several months to fully implement, then that can really impact people's motivation to finish. So the participants or leaders can be tempted to shift their focus on other issues that might come up, and they may be trying to compete for the resources there. And then once the effort is fully implemented, the group might want to quickly shift to the next thing on their plate rather than take the time to reflect and go back and learn from the implementation that they did. So if you contrast that with what happens in manufacturing, maybe you'll have like a week-long Kaizen event in manufacturing. And in that time, the implementation takes place. There could be a presentation for the leadership team to get buy-in. And so we've already gotten that change going. And then they have a time where they reflect all within that same week. And so it's a really different environment than you would see in the office setting. Okay. So I want to talk about going to the Gemba a little bit further because when we go to the Gemba, like I said, we can look and we can assess value, we can assess waste, but we also get a better understanding of the people involved who do the work. And so if we don't get this real world experience and interaction, then our suggested improvements can completely miss the mark. And we could lack buy-in from the people who are doing the work. So I just wanted to get a poll from the group here and see during COVID, what are you guys doing in order to learn about what people are doing in their work? Are you doing it in person still, leveraging virtual tools? Are you totally skipping it right now? Or did you never do it in the first place? So I'm going to give you a moment to enter that into Menti and let's see what you come up with. Okay, so it looks like virtual tools is top right now, followed by in-person, and then skipping, and a couple people never did it in the first place. So we're going to come back to this, but yeah, virtual tools is a really effective way, and I'm really grateful that we have so many tools out here right now to help us with this, because this translates well both for the manufacturing team right now, but also in the office. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to the third difference, which is significance of waste. And before we dive too deep into this, I want to do a quick waste refresher. So I know this is a commonly accepted definition for waste, but I wanted to give props to our awesome host today, KaiNexus, Mark with KaiNexus. And waste is defined as any activity that doesn't add value for the customer. So in our lean framework, it's something that can be considered as a value-adding step if the customer is willing to pay for it, transforms the product being produced, and if it's done properly the first time. So there's commonly 8 wastes that people refer to, and I just wanted to give you guys a little quiz because I know we have a lot of continuous improvement folks out in the audience, and just have you write one waste that you know of into your Menti. Okay, let's see what you got. All right. Looks like everybody knows their stuff. So we got inventory, looks like the one that was repeated the most, followed by maybe defects or overprocessing. All right, so let's see if we missed any. We've got waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, defects, transportation, inventory, motion, and employee potential unrealized. And I always tell a lumberjack story that I'm not going to go into right now, but if anybody wants to contact me, I'd be happy to share it. And that's why I call it wood time. So the last waste on here, E, that one, I mean, in the past, it used to be 7 wastes. And so the employee potential unrealized, that was one that was added a few years back. I don't know when it was added. I could probably look that up. But so if you're familiar with 7 wastes, it changed to 8 wastes a few years ago. All right. So in manufacturing, you often hear that inventory is one of the key wastes, is one of the big ones, and that's because it drives a lot of the other wastes. And it wasn't a big surprise that that was the largest word that I saw when we asked that question for everybody. But there's also considerations in the office that you really want to look at, because these are things that really do drive waste, and they're pretty common in different office settings. So the first one is miscommunication that often occurs during handoffs. So missing information or just a lack of information, something gets missed there. And I think when I'm teaching this, I have people play the telephone game, and then at the end of it, if you've never played that game, what happens is that at the beginning of it, you whisper a message to somebody, they continue to whisper it to the next person, and so forth. And the person at the end I've never seen them get the right answer. They always have a different message that they share with the team. So there's a definite loss there when handoffs are taking place. The next one is work not balanced, which essentially is meaning that somebody might have a lot of work and somebody else might not have very much work at all. The third one is unclear roles and responsibilities. And this can drive duplication of work, and it can also cause struggles with decision making. Fourth is not optimizing manual versus electronic processes. And I know that the trend is always automate, make things electronic. The reality is, if we automate bad processes and we don't really simplify or streamline in advance, then we're costing our companies a lot of money. So we want to make sure that we're optimizing what we do first and foremost, and taking the simpler approach whenever we can. The fifth is excessive inspections and approvals, especially if they are not in alignment with the level of risk, because these inspections and approvals can take a lot of time. And so it just adds a lot more time to the customer getting what they need. Then number 6, we have unread documents and emails. I was in a company where in the first month, I received 1,500 emails that were unnecessary. So emails that I wasn't going to be reading at all. And when I figured out everybody else who was receiving those same emails, that came out to be about $40,000 for the company that they were losing, because people were spending time just trying to delete or get rid of those emails in some way. Mark, glad to have you back.
A little brief power and internet blip, but I'm glad that didn't interrupt your presentation.
Oh, no worries. All right, so I'm going to move to number 7, work done in series versus parallel. And this can't always be done, but if we have our work in parallel, that can often result in faster outcomes for the customer. Then work too complicated or too simple. So this isn't necessarily the exact same thing, but if you look on the right for that image of the inverted U theory, this is really old, so it's from 1908, but it still applies today. And it's saying that there's essentially a sweet spot for people performing at their best. And so when we talk about things being too simple or too complicated, we don't want to drive, either boredom or people being really stressed out. Also, if it's too complicated, then they can spend a lot of time, having to reach out to their own supervisor or something along those lines. And then the last one, performing all work within the process, probably requires a little bit of explanation. So I have mostly examples, but when I call into a company because, maybe I need to change my address, I've had situations where I thought it was going to be 5 minutes and it was at least 20 minutes, because the person on the other end of the phone says, okay, well, let me pull up my system. And then I wait. And then she says, okay, well, tell me your address. And I tell her one time. And she says, okay, let me put it into the system. And then I wait. And it's just, let me open another system because we've got to put it in two places. And so there's all this stuff happening. And I'm like, well, didn't you already write down my address? And she said, yeah. So, well, can I just get off the phone now? She said, no, we're required to keep you on the phone until we're completely done with the whole entire thing. And so, like, could you just put some of it outside of what I'm actually seeing? And then another situation was I worked at a company where they were doing quarterly. It was a publicly traded company. So they did quarterly reports. And every time they had to do this, people were staying at the office until 11 at night. People even spent the night at the office. And so the big win that we had was to carve out what things we could possibly push before this crunch time happened. And so we pulled it out of that critical process time and moved it outside. In manufacturing, it's really common, so they call it single minute exchange of dies or SMED, for them to kind of assess what needs to be absolutely happening at a certain time. So taking that in the office is a good consideration. All right, so I gave you a lot of things to think about. When I was talking about inventory and manufacturing, when I think about this for the office, I think it's really around 3 key areas that drive a lot of issues within an office setting. So one being communication, one being alignment, and another one being decision making. So with poor communication, I don't know if anybody in the group plays volleyball or watches volleyball games, but there's a common practice of yelling, got it. So the ball comes over to your side of the court and somebody yells, got it, and other people back off and that one person gets it. And it's almost like what's necessary from a communication standpoint in the office. It's kind of like volleyball. If 2 people go to get the ball and they don't know who's supposed to get it, they could collide. It could be catastrophic. The ball falls, all of that. Or they could completely miss the ball altogether. So in the office, you might duplicate work then, or you might miss the work altogether and not do the activities necessary. There's poor communication, your customer needs might be overlooked, or if there's not open and honest communication by employees or the workforce, you could have resentment, and it can actually drive to greater turnover. So that's a big one. Alignment. So this would be the case, so where you have members of the organization not moving in the same direction. So inefficient, ineffective, kind of how they're moving in each area. And this can happen with a lack of vertical alignment or lack of horizontal alignment. So for vertical, if the staff is not clear about the mission, vision, and values of the company, the management system, maybe the high level measures, what's important for the company. And that's visible through how people behave and the goals that they have set for themselves. And then horizontally, we could have staff that's not working together, so they may not have synergy to achieve goals. And you might see that as people working in silos or competing for resources. And then when it comes to decision making, so poor decision making can be related to, if you look at somebody's past experience, maybe the company has demonstrated that they harshly and publicly punish a wrong decision. If that's the case, then people are not going to be really keen on setting a decision and having that recorded. If we don't have laid out roles and responsibilities that also include decision-making authority, that also can cause some, issues with, kind of like I said, with communication, with either the decision-making happening with too many people or not happening at all. And then with the culture in general, from a hierarchy standpoint, if the culture really values hierarchy, then the top level or top levels might be making all the decisions in the company. So that's really inefficient because people have to constantly throw things up, wait, that sounds right. They have to throw it up to the people that are up at the top and wait for them to make a decision. And then it also leaves the frontline or the mid-level staff feeling that they have insufficient authority, and it adds delays and stunts the growth of the workforce. So those 3 are really key, I think, when it comes to waste in the office. Okay, so let's talk about adjusted approaches for how we can handle each of these. All right, so first we're going to talk about association to work. And in that, we have pre-interviews, roles versus names, and root cause approach. Okay, for pre-interviews, depending on how much I know about an issue or the people involved, when we have an event or an improvement event that's going to take place, I spend some time initially gauging the buy-in of the people. I want to learn their prior experience. So first I want to find out the buy-in so that I know if they're willing to make changes. And then I want to learn about their experience because it's really important to validate that up front, especially if you are new to the organization or new to that person. It's important because their past experience can kind of act as a barrier in terms of them going in with an open mind into the event. All right, and then we've got barriers, as I mentioned. So just documenting some of the barriers that people informally share with you prior to the event or project. And then lastly, building a relationship and building trust before people enter the room, whether that's virtually or in person. So why do you want to do that? Because talking about your process or your work in front of other people is always intimidating, and it always creates some type of vulnerability. You're putting yourself out there, and the work that you do, especially if you're associated to it, that really feels like you're opening yourself up to other people criticizing it and deciding if it's worthwhile or not. All right, so let's see. Oh, and then the other thing I wanted to say was that my job as a facilitator is to make sure that people feel emotionally safe and open and honest when they are in the room. Okay, so let's see. Okay, so I'm going to move to roles versus names. When we are doing a mapping session, we want to use roles instead of people's names. And so why is that? When changes are made, participants can dissociate from the work better if we're not putting their name up on the board, right? So basically, if we're saying like, this is ineffective or inefficient, people are more likely to be okay with that if it doesn't have their name right next to it. And I know it seems silly and it seems minor, but it's real. I mean, that's really how people kind of feel about that. And they're more likely to volunteer changing their own process or other people's processes if it doesn't have names as well. The last reason for that is that if there's a team of people who are doing similar work and maybe only one person can be in the event at the time, then that allows everyone else who's not in the event to know that represents their work as well. It's not just about that one person's work, it's about theirs too. And if changes are made, it really means that everybody's work is being changed. Okay, and the last one for this category is about root cause approach. So thinking beyond the 5 whys. I know that manufacturing, we use a 5 why approach, and pretty commonly when we talk about root cause. I found that approach to be less effective in an office setting for a couple of reasons. So first of all, the complexity of office problems. If you asked like 5 different people in why something happened, you probably get 5 different answers. And those 5 answers might be completely true. So I feel like in the office setting, things tend to be more of a blend of issues rather than a linear path that provides a single discovery. So it sort of seems like the perfect storm that multiple things work together to create. The other thing is that why, that question, can prompt defensiveness. So the example that we talked about with the mortgage case, with the person losing their home, that's a great example of the word why feeling like a defensive word. All right, so instead, I just use a 6M approach with brainstorming. And so we get human, machine, mother nature, measurement, and method and materials. And that tends to get more openness and creativity from each person. All right, so frequency of work units. As I mentioned before, it impacts data going to the Gemba and sustaining momentum. And so with gathering data, first of all, I would say don't wait if you don't have the data you need and you know that anecdotally there's a problem from a customer standpoint or an employee standpoint that's significant. Just start taking action and build your data plan into that right away. Create your data collection plan. So that's kind of an example here of the fields that you might use for that. And use the virtual tools that you have. So it sounds like a lot of you are doing some virtual work. And so using things like, Menti, like we're using, Idea Boards has some voting options. And so you can leverage some of those. All right, going to the Gemba. So despite the frequency and other challenges that you have, I know we talked a little bit before about, or I guess you guys contributed what you are doing for going to the Gemba. And so I'm just going to mix like the virtual in with what you could do in advance or during the event. But it's when you're doing pre-work, you can have people on your team record themselves on video and be able to share that when you all get together. You can have them notify the facilitator or whoever's doing the data collection beforehand. So when they know that the work is coming, they can contact you and have you show up to it since it might be a little bit unpredictable. You can, let's see what else I was going to think. So you can also have them do like tick sheets. I don't know if anybody has done that before, but I give them like tick sheets or time study tables. And so they can own it themselves if it becomes difficult to match up schedules when it's something that's unpredictable. And then they can also do some benchmarking or look at other organizations that do similar work if it becomes really hard to look at your own. And you could, in the past, you could go to the facilities. Now there's a lot of videos that you could watch online as well. And then during the event itself, multiple people who do the process. So you could have multiple people come in and do the mapping so you at least get the different perspectives. You could have the team demonstrating through a test case, or you could just have, if they held on to a case that they want to do in front of people, they can also bring that to an event as well. And then sustaining momentum of the progress. So I talked before about how it can be difficult to keep it in focus when it can take a long time to implement. So as a facilitator, I find a couple approaches necessary. First, create a monitoring plan or a monitoring approach that involves the team, that's visual, shows the team how they're progressing on action items, includes data to include whether the situation is improving or not, and it has actions ready for anything that goes off track. Then you also want to get the team physically or virtually together and talk at least once a week initially. And then you can usually do it like once a month over time. And that kind of varies depending on the cadence of your implementation plan. When you talk, find out the status of the work, review the data, talk about any barriers, gauge the team's ongoing motivation for change, because that can give you a sense of whether they're going to get steered off track for other things that might be pulling their resources during the period of time. So gauging that, ask whether or not the efforts are working out the way that they expected, because that's something where there could be water cooler talk that they're having to meet all this once a month or once a week, and yet they feel like they expected something different. So you want to get that out in the open in these conversations. And then ensure that the business owner is prepared to tackle any concerns that the team might have. And then lastly, the expectation of imperfection. And that's why I put the PDCA model here on the right, because every CI effort follows that cyclic version of PDCA or whatever you use for your model. And so let the team and the stakeholders know from the beginning that learning from the process and adapting to it does not mean failure. It is part of the change process. Okay, so adjusting to significance of waste. So we talked about a lot of waste falling into these three categories. And so some of the key ways to offset this Looking at the company's strategy and how it's deployed through the organization, both the cadence, whether it's happening at all, and the cadence of which it's happening. Next is partnering for open culture. So working with your human resources department, if you have an internal communications department, because you're looking at shifting people to having an open and honest culture. And so that's going to take more than just you in most cases. It's going to take buy-in from other influential areas of the company. And also be a visible model, a role model for vulnerability and learning from failure. A mix of improvements, so have improvements that are going to be happening at the individual, team, and organizational level, so you can look at both, vertical and horizontal alignment. And then documenting roles and responsibilities, including decision-making authority, and getting that decision at the right level. And the last one is mapping to highlight office waste. So this mapping approach that I use, I learned through Steve Dickinson from PQS, and I just highlighted the colors to show you the different ways that we're kind of highlighting the office wastes here. So the yellow is an intersection or determination step. When you look at like SOPs, a lot of times they are the happy path, I call them, where it assumes everything's going as planned. In an office setting, the unplanned situations, which when you're working with customers, that can happen quite a bit, and that can be a huge cause for defects. And so we want to map those in the process. The greens would be handoffs. And so, as I mentioned before, handoffs can be an opportunity for miscommunication or misinformation. And then the pinks are waits. And I always include a range of how long a wait might take. And usually that's kind of just people's best guess, but you can validate later. I still want the best guess in an event because at the end of the day, when you add up all of those weights, you find there's this aha by the team of how long a customer is sitting there waiting for a decision to be made, for example. So this is a really, I think, a great way to highlight waste in an office setting. Okay, that is all I have to share for you today. So let's get your takeaways. And I think we're not going to take time to have you write them down, but I think we'll just jump over to Menti. That will work okay. And have you just share a concept you learned, an action that you will take, or an idea that you will share.
And then after we have this come in, we'll have a couple of quick announcements, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So I'll again encourage people, if you have a question, please click on Q&A in the Zoom control bar, menu bar, toolbar, whatever you call that. It's great. We have responses coming in. Going to the Gemba more, office waste. Be careful about the 5 whys, creating defensiveness with that. Single piece flow work cell arrangement, 6M versus root cause. Maybe I didn't set these to scroll. We'll be able to go and see what all of those were later, okay. Stephanie.
All right, sounds good. Well, yeah, some good things up there. So we'll jump back over, and I am going to turn it over to Mark now. He'll share my contact information towards the end too, so don't have to write any of that down.
All right. That'll be on the Q&A slide at the very end, Stephanie's contact information. So again, thank you for that, Stephanie. So let me get through the announcements quickly so we can have some good Q&A time. So first off, we want to tell you about upcoming webinars. If you are a KaiNexus customer, you can attend the next training team office hours tomorrow at 1 o'clock Eastern. Our next webinar that's going to be open to everybody is a panel discussion webinar, and it's titled Improving the COVID Vaccination Process, Lessons from the Field. That's going to be on January 21st. We've got 90 minutes scheduled. We're going to have 4 leaders from different healthcare organizations, executives, physician leaders, a process improvement leader. So a really good cross-section to talk about what's happening right now to improve the process for actually giving vaccinations and what still needs to be done. So I think that's going to be really interesting. You can register for either or both of those right now at kinexus.com/webinars. Also want to tell you about our continuous improvement webinar library. If this is your first time attending one of the KaiNexus webinars, we've got, I think, at least 100 recorded webinars there. They are all free. So you can look for the link to the on-demand library in the right-hand sidebar of kinexus.com/webinars. We have a blog at blog.kinexus.com. And we also have a podcast. And the audio from today's session will be in the podcast feed. Stephanie and I did a preview discussion last week. So things like that can all be found in the KaiNexus Continuous Improvement podcast feed. And so with that, let's transition into Q&A. We've got Stephanie's email, and is that the right? Do I have the right email there? Hopefully, that's not a defect on my part. I know it is right. An email for you.
Yes, that's right.
All right. So there's a question. It says, first off, thanks, Stephanie. I'm interested in understanding a bit more about the waste of, quote, performing all work within the process. Does that mean over processing when you might have more steps than necessary, or repeating steps? Thanks again. Great work.
Thank you. I think it's the phrasing that I used is probably missing a word. That would be like the critical process, or maybe the customer facing process. So I wouldn't call it over processing, because a lot of times the work that is being done is necessary and important. It's more of a factor of timing of when that work is taking place. So for instance, if there are templates, let's say people are creating a report and they're starting from scratch every single time. So maybe something that can be done outside of the process can be to create a template and have that be ready to go from day one. And so I think about it as, like, visually for me, maybe like setting up a surgical room. So this is probably something that Mark has talked about with his team too. But when a surgeon reaches their hand out, they have the tool in their hand, ready in the exact way that it needs to face, ready to do the surgery, right? So within that surgery, the critical time, that critical process is performing the surgery. The setup of the tools is not critical for that surgery to take place. So having that attending person help with laying out the surgical tools, you wouldn't want to sterilize them during that time. So all of this stuff happens in advance of that critical process taking place. So that's kind of what I meant by that.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
We had one question that came in. Yes, the slides will be made available. That'll be part of the email that you get tomorrow. And then there was another question about revisiting the 6 M's, but I think, again, I would suggest I sent a link to the slides to the person who had that question, and everybody else can review that later. Another question here, Stephanie. When you document the best known way for the office, what format do you use? The tools used for manufacturing don't work well in the office setting, or at least that's what the questioner is saying. Do you agree with that statement about the tools for manufacturing not applying well, or what tools do you use, formats for documentation?
I'm not sure which documents, I guess, they're referring to for manufacturing,
like maybe
versus
for standard
office
work, or maybe
Okay.
the person asked the question can follow up on that.
Yeah. So a couple of things that it's kind of hard to describe, I would say, at this Q&A, but for taking Visio, so that last map that I showed on the screen with the colors, there's a pretty slick way that you can convert your Visio document into a Word document. And so whenever I do an event, I will provide the team with the Visio map, the visual part of it, as well as the Word document that is more of a step-by-step SOP written version of it. And that version always has a lot more information. You can add links to other documents that people might want to reference. There's all sorts of, I guess, more detail that you can add to that. But that's assuming that a person's going to sit and read this SOP or this document.
Right.
And some might, they might do that. But I would say if it's really that important for people to follow that specific step by step, then a lot of the manufacturing tools do work. You do want to have visuals that are just quick hits. You can look at it really easily and get a sense of what you're supposed to be doing. And so I wouldn't suggest abandoning that for sure.
And I think beyond a document, I think a methodology like training within industry is something that has origins in manufacturing, but is really applicable in all sorts of other settings. And the person who asked that question did follow up, Stephanie, that they were asking about documenting standard work.
Okay.
So thank you for that clarification. We have a question here about the Agile methodology. Can that be applied in manufacturing, in the office? If so, do you find that cutting out a lot of waste? Do you have any experience with that, Stephanie?
Yeah, I just got my Scaled Agile certification a couple months ago, I think. But I would also say I'm really new to it. And so I've been actually looking for people to help with the understanding of it, because I think at the front end of it, gathering customer information, that's where I really see an application for lean continuous improvement. Really getting an understanding of what people are doing today and where are the gaps, and that helps to build what they need to do. The way I've been using Agile has been a lot more on the delivery side of it. So, getting that quick and iterative delivery out to people. And so that, I think they can marry nicely together. But I am learning more about that, and it's an area of curiosity for me for sure.
Okay, thanks. You mentioned the idea of emotional safety. Do you have any tips for how to help people feel more safe in that way?
So virtual tools are actually really helpful for me. I'm finding that it's a little bit easier in a virtual setting than it has been in person. So, with Iowa Lean Consortium, we use idea boards a lot, and that allows people to, anonymously, if they want to, post ideas, and then they can vote anonymously. And so, just getting their idea out there in the first place is really important. But whenever I do in-person events, I also start by always having like little sticky notes in front of everyone. And then I ask them to write down each idea on a different sticky note. And people who are less comfortable speaking out can be more inclined to write down what they're thinking. And then when we go back over it, we talk about it more as a team versus pointing out that one individual person.
Yeah. And post-it notes. You're right. People, in my experience, some people are more comfortable verbalizing things than others. Post-it notes are great. Even a tool, this is going to start sounding like an ad for this menti.com. It's not perfect. We've used it, but that could be used with a group of people who were, let's say, sitting in the same room to get feedback or ideas.
And that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Mark.
No, it's all right.
That 6M, I didn't really spend a lot of time on it just because I think we were, trying to keep our time. But essentially, when we do the 6M root cause, learning about that, I ask everyone to initially write one idea for every M. So, human, materials, method, whatever. So they start off by putting one up there, and then they all do that quietly, and then they'll share what theirs is, or I will read it for other people. But then we do kind of do more like why exercises, or, because I'll say, what is a factor that was involved in it, rather than saying why. And then I'll say, why did that factor happen? And then it's less emotional, it's less personal, and it's more about that sticky on the wall. And then it becomes more engaging, and the team will open up that way.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of this comes back to culture, and this is the risk of trying to copy and paste ideas from Toyota.
Mhm.
If you have a culture where it's well established that individuals are not being blamed, you can use words like problem, defect. You can ask why, and it's well understood that that's, you know, it's inquisitory, but it's not an
Mhm.
inquisition
Right.
aimed at the individual. When we're starting to do these things in organizations that do not have that culture, yeah, I've seen that, research that says the word why does trigger defensiveness. I find it happening.
Mhm.
A phrase like what allowed that to occur
Yeah.
might be a little bit less loaded. But again, if
Mhm.
there's really not a lot of trust, even then that might be upsetting. So we all have to kind of read the room and know the organization a little bit.
I might say, what factors do you think might have led to that?
Yeah, that's a great way of saying it
Mhm.
too. So one other question here. As a new KaiNexus customer, I was wondering how you're using KaiNexus in your practice. And if so, have you identified any challenges when using it in an office versus a manufacturing setting?
Did you write that question, Mark?
No, it came from Rich. It's a real person. Hi, Rich.
Just
Thank
kidding.
you for being a customer.
I was using KaiNexus at the last company where I worked, and we used it in manufacturing and in the office setting. Um, for in the office setting, we had I think the kiosk is kind of a newer offering by KaiNexus,
Mhm.
and so we had it just really basic for people in manufacturing that they could walk up to kiosk or their laptop or whatever, and there would only be one option, which was, I have an idea or I have an improvement or something. um, and that was kind of it. It was really, really basic. In the office setting, we used it for project management. We used it for ideas. We used it for everything. And so I I don't really have a standard answer to that. I would just say that, so I would say props to the team at KaiNexus, because I felt like the sky was the limit and you could hop on a call with anyone from there at any time, and very quickly they were trying to resolve any challenge that you might be facing. So they're very successful at doing that. So yeah, I think it was great.
All right. Well, thank you for addressing that, and thank you for the question. So we'll go ahead and wrap up here. I want to thank Stephanie Hill from Lightbulb Moment Consulting for sharing with us today these ideas that go to show things are transferable, and I've heard people use the phrase we can adopt, but we also need to adapt. And I
Yeah,
think you
that's
gave us
great.
some really great perspectives around that today. So again, everyone will get an email tomorrow, the recording, the slides. You can find it on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe there. You can find it in our podcast feed if you want to listen. And we certainly encourage you, please do share this with colleagues. We're happy to make this available for everybody. So thanks to everybody who attended, and Stephanie, especially to you. Thank you. Thank you so much for doing this today.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Mark.